order. The motion before us is that this House believes that humanitarianism is a first world affectation. I now call upon the Prime Minister to deliver the opening speech for the government.
Thank you very much, very beautiful people of Athens, ladies and gentlemen, and lovely judges. Kalimera sas Kyrias Kekiri, just so I can get a cheap populist, just for that cheap populist round of applause. Well, let's look at the motion. This House believes that humanitarianism is a first world affectation. And what the Oxford team know from having spent a whole week with debaters, we know when people are putting on a false front, we know when people are doing things for populist reasons, like telling judges they love them and then slagging them off for giving them bad results. And so what the Oxford team want to contend is this, is we don't like the affectation put on when countries seek to impose a moral foreign policy into their policies. In other words, what we're trying to say is we're going against the current trend of Western photo-op foreign policy, only having foreign policy with countries that are nice. We want to go against the backlash of a moral foreign policy. No thanks, no thanks. And because we want to keep this debate open, we could win it immediately by talking about Cuba and about how the American policy on Cuba is absolutely rubbish. But we want to keep this debate open as a general theme, that countries, when they're dealing with their foreign policy, should not look at the moral stance of other countries. Free trade, it should be trade free and fair. And what we are going to say, no thanks, not yet, what we are going to say is, of course, we're not saying we should ignore all international agreements on things like human rights conventions. Of course, we should keep them. Let the United Nations deal with them. But when you're talking about a country's own foreign policy, we don't want people to take into account human rights abuses in other countries. So there are 3 points that the Oxford team are going to contend. The first is one of stability. The second is one of consistency. And the third one is how Ben and I would do it, the Oxford solution. So let's first turn to the point about stability. And what we've seen advocates of anti-moral foreign policies that Ben and I are producing in the past. Metternich, Castlereagh, Henry Kissinger, people like Kissinger who realized that yes, Russia did in the old Soviet Union treat its dissidents badly, but it's better from a point of view of world stability to have trade with Russia and good negotiations rather than damming them down for their human rights abuses. Yeah.
Was this the same Henry Kissinger that gave a tacit green light to Indonesia to invade East Timor?
I'm not... The simple point is we're not saying that this is going to provide a solution for everything. We're not saying that the United Nations shouldn't be able to deal when countries invade other countries. What we are saying is when countries individually are deciding their own foreign policy, it's in the interests of world stability for them not to take into account human rights abuses. Let the UN be the person who goes around imposing moral stances on people. Let's not have the country itself doing it. So let's come on to our second example in the area of stability. We've seen that Bill Clinton, I feel your pain, we've seen that Bill Clinton came to office saying that he wanted to link China's most favoured trading nation status to their human rights record. Like a lot of other things, he totally reversed his policy and is now seeing the benefits of trading with China, constructive engagement, saying to China, yes, we know you have human rights abuses, but we will trade with you and we will not take into account that and start imposing sanctions on you. What are the benefits that we've seen from China, as an example? They've signed nuclear non-proliferation treaties, they've joined regional security clubs, no thank you. A policy of constructive engagement worked far better than saying, we don't like what you do to your people and we're not going to have trade with you. Not yet, thank you. So what is the link between stability? Why is it that what we're proposing is actually going to provide stability in the world? And what Ben and I contend is this. In a modern world, disputes are sorted out by international pressure. Let's look at the example of Bosnia. It was Germany that brought Croatia to the table to negotiate. It was Russia who brought the Serbs to negotiate. What we see is that countries' diplomatic links to other countries, not offending other countries, comes in amazingly useful when you want to solve international disputes. Yeah.
Wasn't it because these countries actually used their economic might and the threat of sanctions that they actually came to the table? They did use economic sanctions in those cases, and that's why it worked.
I don't think so. I think the simple fact is Germany realised that Croatia was a good partner to trade with. It realised that although Croatia had done nasty things during the war, it realised it's better to keep up good economic links with them and not cut them off. And that way you can get people to the negotiating table. It's the simple fact that in the modern world, disputes are solved by international pressure, not by countries acting alone. Let's get on to our second point, which is one of consistency. What we see is, let's see how this policy can never be consistent. In the old days, before Bill Clinton reversed and became a constructive engagementist, the United States used to have a policy that said, Cuba is communist, abuses human rights, and doesn't allow democracy. But China also is communist, abuses human rights, and doesn't allow democracy. The point is with a moral foreign policy is you can never be fair. You can always say, no thanks, you can always say, I don't want to trade with Great Britain. Great Britain has lost 50 cases in the European Court of Human Rights. It has lost human rights causes of abuses. So what the Oxford team contend is that you can never say that there's simple nice men and nasty men, and it's better to be consistent, it's better to be consistent than to pick countries out arbitrarily. So finally, what are Ben and I proposing? Are we proposing that we just shut our eyes and go back and living in a farming world and not talking to other countries? No. What Ben and I are proposing is that you let wealth grow through capitalism. Let money be transferred to the people inside the countries. Because what sanctions do when you impose them on countries is they hurt the people. Let's look at Iraq. When we had sanctions imposed on Iraq, infant mortality went up, life expectancy went down. But if we'd had free trade, money would be transferred to the people. That's why the World Trade Organization is so much more concerned with decreasing tariffs than looking at which countries are abusing human rights. So let's sum up the Oxford team case again. My partner Ben is going to come on and look and see why moral foreign policy often has fraudulent motives. For instance, he's going to look at the Cuban example, where you need to win the Cuban exile vote in Florida to win a presidential election, and that's often why foreign policy bashes Cuba. But the case that I presented is this. It's better to have stability in a world where disputes are solved by international tension. Henry Kissinger, Castlereagh and Metternich all realise this. You can never, ever, ever be consistent, and what Ben and I contend is that you must let wealth grow through capitalism and through free trade with countries, and it's for these reasons that I beg to propose this motion.